The most dangerous people are those who give everything of themselves, asking for nothing in return. They invest their time, love, and energy into others, believing that sacrifice is the key to earning loyalty, respect, and trust. But when they have nothing left to give, when all that remains is emptiness, what happens then? What happens when the only thing they can offer is their life, and those they've trusted are the ones who take it all without a second thought? This is the story of Aiden Cooper, a man who gave everything he had for the ones he loved, only to be left with nothing but an empty grave. His life wasn't just a tale of hard work and sacrifice, it was a tragic example of how loyalty can be repaid with betrayal. As his family and friends mourned his passing, no one knew the secrets that had been hidden from them, secrets that would unravel a family and expose a darkness no one could have foreseen. What happens when a life of giving is met with deceit and manipulation? In January 2023, the small town of Willow Creek, Alabama, was shaken by the sudden and tragic death of Aiden Cooper, a cherished son, brother, and husband. Aiden's life had been defined by his tireless work ethic and sacrifice. Known for his commitment to his family, he held down 2 jobs, believing that his sacrifices would pave the way for a secure future for those he loved. But what few knew was that Aiden, behind his generous nature, was overwhelmed by the constant pressure, exhausted, and left feeling isolated by the very people he supported. On the day of his funeral, friends, family, and neighbors gathered to pay their respects to the man who had given everything. His wife, Caroline, stood at the front, wiping away tears with a pristine handkerchief, accepting condolences with a level of grace that seemed almost too composed for the occasion. Yet, as the mourners departed and the casket was lowered into the ground, something far darker was beginning to unfold. Just hours after her husband was laid to rest, Caroline would be found in the arms of another man, in the very bed she had shared with Aiden for years. The only witness to this act of betrayal was Aiden's younger brother, Julian. What transpired next would ignite a series of tragic events that no one could have predicted. What should have been a time of mourning quickly turned into chaos, with a life lost, a man charged with murder, and a family shattered by secrets that should have been revealed long before. The day of Aiden Cooper's funeral, the town of Willow Creek came together to say goodbye to a man who had always been there for others. His casket was lowered into the ground, and mourners whispered their condolences, remembering a man who had worked tirelessly to provide for his family. Among the many who paid their respects was his wife, Caroline, who clutched a handkerchief and shed tears that seemed to reflect the weight of the community's collective sorrow. But as the last mourner left the cemetery, a chilling reality began to unfold. Caroline, once married to Aiden, would soon be found in the arms of another man. Just hours after her husband's funeral, Caroline was in the same bed she had once shared with Aiden, this time with another man named Ethan, an old acquaintance she had secretly been seeing behind Aiden's back. The only person who witnessed this moment of betrayal was Julian, Aiden's younger brother. He had returned to the family home to retrieve Aiden's prized wristwatch, an heirloom from their father that Aiden had worn daily. But as he approached the door, he noticed it slightly ajar. Inside, the laughter of Caroline and Ethan echoed through the hall. What Julian saw next left him in shock. His brother had been betrayed, not just in life but in death as well. What Julian witnessed would set off a chain of tragic events, leading to a confrontation that no one could have predicted. Secrets that had remained hidden for years now spilled into the open, and the devastating consequences would forever alter the lives of those involved. Julian stood frozen at the threshold, his mind struggling to process what he had just seen. His brother Aiden, a man who had sacrificed everything for those he loved, was not only dead but betrayed in the most intimate and callous way possible. Caroline, standing in the room with Ethan, seemed utterly unfazed by the gravity of the situation. Julian's heart sank as he realized that the woman who had been the center of Aiden's world had already moved on, without remorse, without a shred of grief. As the shock of the moment settled in, Julian's immediate instinct was to confront his sister-in-law, but his emotions overwhelmed him. Anger, confusion, and deep sorrow twisted inside him. He turned and left, not knowing how to process the betrayal, the loss of his brother, and the devastation of what had just been revealed. Caroline's actions following Aiden's death only added to the growing sense of unease. Instead of grieving, she seemed focused on settling the financial matters. She rushed through the funeral arrangements with an unsettling haste, making decisions about Aiden's life insurance policy without a second thought. To those who knew Aiden best, it was clear that Caroline wasn't grieving the loss of her husband. She was more concerned with securing her future. The family gathered for the repast later that afternoon, but even in this intimate moment of remembrance, Caroline's behavior seemed out of place. She cut the event short, claiming she was overwhelmed, but it wasn't long before Julian noticed the familiar car parked down the street again, Ethan's car. The final blow came later that night when Julian overheard Caroline and Ethan discussing their future together, their plans for the life insurance money and what came next. The true nature of Caroline's betrayal had only just begun to reveal itself. Aiden Cooper was born and raised in Willow Creek, Alabama, the eldest of 3 children in a family that valued hard work and loyalty above all else. From a young age, Aiden had been taught the importance of sacrifice, to put others before himself, and to always work for the greater good of his family. His father, a mechanic, instilled in him a sense of responsibility, and his mother, a schoolteacher, taught him to always be considerate and fair. These values shaped Aiden into a man who would go on to give his all for those he loved. By the time Aiden reached his late 20s, he had built a stable life. He was managing a local auto repair shop, working long hours to ensure that the business survived and that his family's financial situation was secure. Despite his hard work, he was never the type to indulge in luxury. His focus was always on his family, his wife, Caroline, and their 2 young children. Caroline, on the other hand, came from a different background. Raised in a single-parent household, she had always yearned for more. Ambitious and determined to live a life of luxury, she had a string of short-term relationships and jobs that didn't last. Her desire for wealth and status often led to conflict with Aiden, who couldn't understand her obsession with material things. When they married, Aiden believed he could provide the stability she lacked, but he never fully grasped how much she longed for a life of affluence. Aiden's brother Julian had always been the quieter sibling. A year younger than Aiden, he had a deep admiration for his older brother, looking up to him for his work ethic and integrity. Julian's role in the family was often that of the peacekeeper, trying to keep harmony even when things got tense. His loyalty to Aiden ran deep, and he struggled with the tension he saw growing between his brother and Caroline over the years. As the months went by, Aiden's life became a balancing act of endless responsibilities. While he worked tirelessly to provide for his family, Caroline's demands grew increasingly insatiable. It wasn't just the material things anymore: designer clothes, lavish vacations, or the newest gadgets for the house. It was the emotional toll she took on him, her need for constant validation, and her growing resentment when things didn't go according to her plans. Aiden, ever the dutiful husband, kept his frustrations to himself, determined not to let his family see his struggles. But Julian could see it. He watched his brother become more withdrawn, his eyes growing tired with each passing day. The once joyful man who had spent hours fixing cars at the shop and playing with his kids had started fading. Now, Aiden's world revolved around his work and trying to keep Caroline happy. Even when they did have time together, Caroline would bring up her dissatisfaction with their life, making it clear that she wasn't content with the modest home they lived in or the life Aiden had worked so hard to build. Julian tried to intervene, offering his brother advice or simply spending time with him, but Aiden's loyalty to Caroline kept him from truly seeing the cracks in his marriage. He believed that if he worked harder, made more sacrifices, he could provide the life Caroline wanted. But the harder he worked, the more distant he became from the family he had once held so dear. Tensions in the household continued to build, with Caroline's increasingly erratic behavior and Aiden's growing exhaustion. It wasn't just the physical demands of work that drained him, it was the emotional weight of a marriage that had started to feel like a prison, where nothing he did was ever enough. As Aiden continued to stretch himself thin between jobs and trying to please Caroline, the tension in their marriage reached a breaking point. Julian, still watching from the sidelines, noticed the small changes: the missed family dinners, the late nights at the shop, and the increasing distance between Aiden and Caroline. The small cracks in their relationship were becoming impossible to ignore, and yet, Aidan remained blind to the full extent of his wife's discontent. Caroline's need for a more extravagant lifestyle, her growing impatience with Aidan's inability to give her everything she wanted, was starting to boil over. One evening, Julian visited Aidan at the auto shop, determined to talk to him about his concerns. The conversation started small, but quickly escalated as Julian expressed his worries about Caroline's behavior. "Aidan, you can't keep going like this," Julian urged, his voice full of concern. "You're burning yourself out, and for what? She's not even seeing it. She's not seeing you." Aidan, his face weary from months of stress, just shrugged it off. "I'm doing this for her, Julian. I can't stop now. She needs me." But something inside Julian snapped. He knew his brother was in too deep, trapped in a cycle of sacrifice and self-doubt. He tried one last time to break through to him, but Aidan was resolute, unwilling to face the truth of what was happening. And so, Julian walked away, unsure of how much longer he could protect his brother from the inevitable. As the weeks wore on, Julian's unease grew, and a sense of impending disaster loomed large. The tipping point was near, but no one could have predicted how quickly it would come. The night of Aidan's funeral, the tension that had been quietly simmering finally exploded. Julian had returned home to gather his brother's most prized possession, an old watch their father had passed down to Aidan before his death. It was a small gesture, but to Julian, it represented everything his brother had worked for and fought to protect. But when he arrived at the house, something felt off. The door was slightly ajar, and a sense of unease washed over him. Julian knocked softly, but there was no answer. He pushed the door open further and called out to Caroline, but the silence was unsettling. As he stepped inside, the soft hum of music could be heard from the master bedroom, followed by the unmistakable sound of laughter. The hairs on the back of Julian's neck stood up. He made his way down the hallway, heart pounding in his chest, when he reached the bedroom door. He saw it, Caroline, his brother's wife, still in her funeral dress, laughing and drinking champagne with Ethan, the man she had been secretly seeing. The betrayal hit Julian like a punch to the gut. His brother, who had given everything for this woman, was not even cold in the ground, and here she was, celebrating with another man in the very bed she had shared with him. The anger and shock surged through Julian, and before he could even process what was happening, words flew out in a blur, accusing Caroline of everything. But Caroline, cold and unbothered, simply shrugged it off. "He's dead now. Get over it," she spat. The moment of confrontation escalated quickly as Ethan, fueled by arrogance, stepped in. Julian was left reeling, his worst fears now a painful reality. The devastation of losing Aidan was nothing compared to the crushing blow of betrayal he had just witnessed. The events of that night would set off a chain reaction that no one could have predicted. Julian, still reeling from the sight of his brother's betrayal, rushed out of the house, his mind clouded with anger and confusion. His instincts told him to leave, to get as far away as possible from the chaos, but deep down he knew that this wasn't something that could be easily ignored. As Julian stumbled outside, his thoughts were interrupted by a familiar voice, Ethan shouting after him, trying to escalate the confrontation. The situation took a darker turn as Ethan, clearly agitated, moved toward Julian with a threatening posture. Julian, desperate to get away, found himself backed into a corner. Tension filled the air as Ethan's aggressive behavior grew more intense. It seemed that things were about to spiral even further out of control. In that moment of chaos, the unmistakable sound of a gunshot rang through the night air. Julian's heart raced as the situation escalated, but it wasn't him who had been shot. Caroline, in her attempt to intervene, found herself in the wrong place at the wrong time. The bullet intended for Julian struck her in the neck, sending her to the ground in an instant. The world seemed to stop as Julian screamed for help, rushing to her side. He couldn't believe what had just happened. His own sister-in-law, caught in a deadly spiral of greed and betrayal, now fighting for her life. The following hours were a blur of sirens and chaos. Caroline was rushed to the hospital, but it was clear that the damage was done. The consequences of her actions had finally caught up to her, and the fallout from that tragic moment would change everything for the Cooper family. The tragedy of Aidan Cooper's life wasn't just that he died too soon, or that he was betrayed by the people he loved most. It was that he spent his entire life believing his value was in what he could give to others. Aidan was a man defined by his sacrifices, by the relentless work he put into building a life for his family, all while neglecting the fact that his own needs, his own happiness were always secondary. The lesson here is painful yet profound. Self-worth is not defined by what we can provide for others, but by who we are at our core. Aidan's devotion to his wife, Caroline, and his family blinded him to the manipulations that were slowly destroying him. He gave everything without ever questioning if he was truly valued in return. His death, his loss, and the destruction of his family came not because of external forces, but because of a deep, systemic disregard for his own well-being. The ones closest to him saw his giving nature as an opportunity, not as the act of love it was intended to be. Caroline's actions serve as a stark reminder of the dangers of greed, manipulation, and selfishness. She took from Aidan until there was nothing left to take, and in the end, her disregard for his life and her own role in his suffering led to her ultimate downfall. This story is a call to action for all of us to recognize the worth within ourselves and to avoid sacrificing our own happiness for the sake of others who may never appreciate it. True value lies not in what we give, but in how we honor ourselves and our boundaries.